Hi, my name's Liz and I'm an artist and educator here at Maitland Regional Art Gallery. And today we're going to be doing a watercolour workshop inspired by this work behind me by Izabela Pluta called An Over-Air Pursuit of Likeness. As you can see, it's quite a big work and it's created using digital images and they're printed onto an aluminium panel. And you can see here these big long poles which are created out of reused, recycled artist easels. This work actually references a photograph that was taken out of an aeroplane by her father on the day that her family immigrated to Australia from Poland. This artwork is made up of multiple panels and images. Which one stands out to you the most? What does this artwork make you think of? How would you describe it? Maybe think of one word that you might use. How do you think it would feel to be inside this artwork? Do you think the artwork feels like it has a sense of movement, or is it more still? This artwork references the sky and the weather. Do you have a favourite type of weather, and why is that? Do you think that the artwork looks textured, or does the surface look smooth? And finally, do you like the artwork? Perhaps you don't like it. Maybe have a think about why. Now that we've spent some time looking at the artwork, we're going to move into an art making activity. So now we're going to start our art making. I'm going to run you through 4 different ways of using watercolour to create texture, and I'll just run you through the different things that you'll need for this art making activity. So I've got 2 pieces of watercolour paper, and with watercolour you can use a traditional watercolour or you can use a watercolour ink. You might also like to just water down some acrylic paint, and another thing that you can use if you have it at home is food colouring. I'm using the colour blue today. You'll need some glue, so I've just got a glue stick, but PVA glue is fine. Some salt, so just kitchen salt. I've got water, a box of tissues, got some paintbrushes. If you don't have any paintbrushes at home, you can just use a kitchen sponge. Some scissors, and also some tissue paper. If you don't have any tissue paper at home, that's okay. I'm going to walk you through 4 different techniques, so you can have a play around with all of them. So the first thing that I'm going to do is take my A4 sheet of watercolour paper and just cut it into 4 even sections. You might like to start by just folding it in half. And then cutting down that middle line. And then folding each of those sections in half. And then cutting those in half as well. So I'm going to take 1 sheet of watercolour paper and put the other 3 aside. So I'm going to be using a watercolour ink today. So I'm just going to mix it with my water. And just give that a bit of a stir. So the first technique I'm going to be using, actually this is the salt. So I'm going to cover my entire piece of paper with colour. And you can always apply this with a sponge. So making sure that it's all covered. And then I'm just simply going to shake some salt over the top. Be quite generous. And you can see that the salt has started to absorb some of the water, and so it attracts the pigment in and changes the texture. And then I'm just going to leave that aside to dry. Then I'm going to take a second piece of paper And again, covering the whole piece of paper with colour. I'm going to grab one of my tissues and just scrunching it up into a ball, start to dab away some of the colour from the paper. As you can see, it leaves these really interesting, almost cloudy patterns on the page. And you might like to add lots of layers to this one, so I'm going to just drop in some more colour into some sections, just to give it a little bit more contrast. And you can keep playing around until you decide that you're happy with the result. And then just pop that one aside to dry as well. So for our third piece of paper, I'm going to grab some fresh water and just gently get most of the colour off my brush. And I'm just going to apply clean water all over this piece. Doesn't matter if there's a little bit of colour in it. And then I'm going to use my coloured water again and just gently drop colour into different sections. And then you might like to lift up your piece of paper and just move it around the page. And then I'm just going to sit that one aside. For our fourth piece, this is where we're going to use the tissue paper. So what I'm going to do is just cut a little square, so about the same size as our watercolour paper. And I'm going to place it on top of the watercolour paper, just like that. And then taking my brush in my coloured water and just gently painting over the top of it. So you don't want to press too hard. And you'll notice that the tissue paper starts to lift. And this creates a really interesting texture. And then I'm going to simply peel the tissue paper off to reveal a pattern underneath. And then put that one aside to dry as well. So you've created 4 very different images using 4 different techniques, but the same kind of materials. And you can have a quick look over the work that you've made, noticing which ones are quite soft looking, noticing which ones have hard edges. And it's really important to let these works fully dry before we move on to the next step. So for the last part of the art making project, you're going to need your glue and your second piece of paper. All of your work should be completely dry. And you're just going to start by tearing them into pieces. So they can be big pieces or they can be small pieces. And then I'm just going to put them aside. So this way you're going to have lots of different sections of artwork that have different textures and different amounts of colour on them. You can give them a bit of a mix. And then I'm going to take this plain sheet of paper. And what you're going to do now is just to create a bit of a collage with your torn up pieces of paper. So I'm going to put quite a lot of glue on the back. You can be quite generous because the paper is quite thick. And then just start placing them on your piece of paper. I like to keep maybe about a 1 centimetre border around the edge just to frame the work. I'm going to start to choose alternative pieces of paper so that I get a nice contrast between the different textures until I fill up my whole entire page. And with my artwork, I'm going to try and make it so that you can't see any of the white plain pieces of paper underneath. All right. I think I'm pretty happy with that. I've got a few extra pieces left over, but that's okay. I'll just pop them aside. And I'm just going to gently press down onto the surface of my artwork just to get all of the bits that aren't quite gluing stuck down. And there we go. Once you feel like your artwork is complete, you might like to take some time to reflect on your art making process and also your finished artwork. What title are you going to give your artwork? Do you think that your artwork is best seen as a landscape or perhaps in portrait? Is there a section of your artwork that you like best? And perhaps think about why. Having a close look at the textures and patterns that you've made. What do the different patterns and textures make you think of? If you were to create the artwork again, would you choose a different colour? Or perhaps would you choose multiple colours? And does your artwork remind you of any sorts of weather patterns or something that you might find in nature? Thanks so much for joining me in this art making session inspired by the work of Izabela Pluta. This video is available to watch at any time. You can take your time with it, and there's also an adjoining worksheet that you're welcome to use.